Commissioners, welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting. Sorry, I'm running a few minutes late. We'll go ahead and get started today. I should note that Commissioner Allen is not going to be with us today because he is out of town. And so tonight I'll be asking for a motion to excuse his absence, but for today we'll get started with Committee of the Whole. And Commissioners, we have a couple presentations this morning. Actually, we have 5 presentations before we get to action items that we're going to vote on. So the very first one is I want to welcome and introduce Mr. Art Davis with Springstead Waters. He is going to be the point person that we work with as we reboot our city manager search. I think everyone, so we talked about moving forward with Springstead Waters at our last meeting. Our city attorney here has taken the lead on following up with Springstead Waters and getting our contract in place. So thank you, city attorney, for all of your work. And then it was last week I sent all of you Art's contact information, and I know he was able to connect with most of you to get some feedback. And then he adjusted his schedule to join us today to talk through a few things to kind of get started so we can give him a little bit more direction and send him on his way to get this process restarted. So Art, welcome to our city again. Those of you may remember, Art was the point person who helped hire our fire chief. So if you were part of the fire chief hiring process, you may remember Art from that. And then he also worked with us I think one other time, or at least in our community one other time.
Our company has.
Your company has. So welcome, Art. I'll just turn it over to you to take it away, and then I'll allow commissioners to ask questions, and then if you have any questions for us as a body, we can answer those.
Great.
So.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Commission. Thank you so much for allowing us to assist you in this process. I have had nothing but extremely warm and incredible experiences here in Grand Rapids, and I talk about it everywhere I go. It's really one of the cities to emulate if you're local government in the U.S., and I do fly all over the country working with cities, so my hat's off to you all. First of all, I will be having some handouts for distribution. I've got just a template, a draft schedule to kind of talk about. It's not set in stone. It's just based on some of the discussions that I had with the mayor and the members of the City Commission. And so we can kind of talk through that and work through that today. I also have just a list of some of the characteristics and skills and abilities and experience that you're looking for in a city manager based on the earlier profile you did in this process. And my impression is there's really not a lot that in discussions with you that you'd like to change. It was based on community input, based on your input and organizational input. So I just kind of bullet pointed some of the same things that were in the profile, and just to give you something to look at if there is something that jogs your memory that you want to bring up. My impression is in discussions there was some concern based on some kind of time constraints with the process earlier, and hopefully we can kind of accommodate those concerns in this draft timeline that we're going to talk about today. And then also some thoughts that we want to kind of relook at the public process of this recruitment and eventual hiring of a new city manager. And it's not something that we need to nail down the details today, but if you do have thoughts, it's good to hear them. And but ideally, that's something once we are able to narrow down the most qualified candidates, and you're reviewing whom you'd like to narrow down to bring in for interviews, then at that point, in a couple of months, hopefully, then we can nail down the details of exactly the step-by-step process so that you can kind of show full transparency to the public what the process you're going to go through to make that done. It is a little bit premature right now because we just don't know the numbers of qualified candidates. You may want to add steps to that screening, whether it be phone interviews or other kinds of vetting before you decide on that. And so I would just suggest, based on my experience, that we not be kind of locked in stone on the details related to that at this point. Definitely want to do it when we're reviewing the most qualified candidates at that point. So I guess I'd like to open it up and see if you've seen my background and bio and our company's proposal, so I really don't need to summarize all of that information. Are there any questions or suggestions before I bring up a few more issues and issues related to the timeline?
Commissioners?
Ms.
Okay.
Hitchcock, City Attorney Hitchcock, do you have those copies yet by chance?
They're on their way.
Okay, sorry.
All right.
I don't remember the exact date, even though I just recently put the timeline together.
So we have the timeline. Is somebody making copies and bringing them
Yeah.
up? Okay.
I had emailed them to the city attorney, and she's got somebody making copies for us, so.
Okay, great.
I think it was somewhere around April 13th was the kickoff, but we'll have to
Here we go.
look at the timeline. Thank you so much. And there are extra copies that we distribute to the media or anybody in the crowd here.
So Art, maybe you can speak to also before the position is posted, and maybe you have this in here already. If there's any other feedback you need from us before the profile is finalized and posted, and maybe a process for that as well.
Well, I think the question came up, do we need to talk about or identify a different salary range that you would be willing to consider as a part of this process might provide some enhanced incentive for candidates to put their name in for this position. I think trying to remember, there were a couple of other questions for you all to talk about. But let's open it up with that, and then if those other issues will come to mind here in a minute.
So, because I do think today a couple key points we should try to talk about and nail down. One is process for the profile. I know, I think the consensus is we feel like we got a lot of community input on the profile, that it was very well informed. We may want to make a few edits and changes, and so I know you heard that from some of the commissioners, and so I'm just thinking process. If you want to,
My plan is to get you a full text once I get more input today on inaccurate or that has changed in the last 6 months since this was put together. Need to know that, and then we'll put together a kind of a final brochure document. We will not put anything out until you get a chance to review it.
Great. Okay.
And
So process-wise, you'll work on a draft, you'll get it to us, we'll have a couple days to edit, give you feedback. Once it's finalized, you'll send it to all of us to review one more time, and your hope is to have that posted, I'm looking at the timeline now, by April 13th.
completed by April 13th, correct?
Okay, great. Commissioners, any feedback on that?
Yes, thanks, Art, for bringing this timeline and the text portion of the profile. I don't know that I shared this with you when we talked personally, but the last profile that we had, they had a number of pictures in there, and most of the pictures, probably 98% of them, were from downtown Grand Rapids. And, excuse me, I think that that's great to highlight downtown, but some of the feedback that was not able to be integrated into the profile was to try and diversify the locations.
Some neighborhoods. and
Yeah,
that
get some
kind of thing.
neighborhoods and things of that nature to kind of showcase the entire city. And I don't know, City Attorney, if, you know, if you're kind of serving as that liaison where I'm sure staff members of different departments have pictures from various activities throughout the city, and maybe there could be some coordination with getting those pictures to Art.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if Amy and Steve are here. There's Amy. Amy, can you take the lead on that and just making sure, we heard that feedback. I think we tried to send some additional ones, but that is definitely an area, as Commissioner Lanier said, needs to be improved this time. So can you work on that? And maybe even send some pictures to the commission to review before they're finalized?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other thing, Art, I think, just for the record, I really think it's important for us. I think the historic nature of our city is an important feature to have in the profile, so that any candidate that's reading the profile, they have that historic perspective. But I don't know that it's located in the best place. I don't know that we should lead with that. I think we should lead with the needs that we have, so that we can receive candidates who are eager to address the needs, as opposed to just interested in Grand Rapids as a city. So just placement of all of that, but in terms of what's in there, the content is well written, I think. and
Yeah.
Pretty robust.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Commissioner. Okay, any, Commissioners, any concern about that process to edit the profile and get that ready to go? All right.
No, I
Good, Commissioner?
don't have any concerns. I do like the idea of your sending it back to us, including the pictures, so that we can all have a chance to look at that, and make sure that, you know, the whole city's represented well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, can we make sure we vote on it on April 10th? That's what can we vote on it then? or-
I mean, typically, what I've worked, most clients just simply give me their suggestions
So we
and they
can have it
develop
before that.
consensus
Okay.
without having a formal vote at a meeting,
Yeah,
if that's
typic-
okay.
And we didn't last time either, so typically it's similar to when we finalized the clerk posting.
Sure.
Usually we just do that internally.
But if you do have concerns, I mean, we'll take those and try to work around all of those.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's appropriate. Okay. All right. Okay, so walk us through. Art.
Okay. On the timeline, try to get this posted, get the brochure completed April 13th. I have talked with most everybody here about sometimes, when you're talking 30 days or 40 days in an expedited rush to find candidates to submit their interest, and many of them may not be looking for jobs at the time that we approach them and talk to them. So it takes time, because they've got their current jobs and those priorities that are going on. They've got to talk with their family. They understand some of the nuances of Michigan law with the putting the information public before the final decision is made. And so, there's a whole series of discussions that must take place. And so the 30 or 40 days can be a kind of tight, constraining timeline. And some people that are happily employed may think it's not worth continuing to evaluate whether they put in or not. So we've allocated approximately 2 months, 60 days for that open period consideration. We then would really scrutinize and vet the details and try to get as much information on each of the candidates, of the most qualified candidates, and whether that be 8, 10, 12, 15. I hate to lock in on a number, because it could be a whole variety of candidates that are well qualified, but in different ways. Because not everybody's going to meet perfectly your expectations that these individuals kind of glide across water. And you've got there's a balancing act here, and as to what's most important, and the more we can find out about them and be able to present that full picture to you of these candidates, I think the better decision you'll make with that more information. So we'll get as much as we can. We also have the video link that we have them respond to questions, that you all have access to a link to be able to see these folks in action, so you can actually see their, is there a leadership presence? And we don't ask trick questions, but we try to ask questions that are substantive and try to discern if there's substance in their response, that they have clarity of thought, that they're articulate, that they would be a good spokesperson for your community, that you get to see them in action a little bit. Because when you ask Eric, or the city manager here, interim or past city managers, you expect them to be able to respond with clarity, and if they don't know, have the appropriate answer to find it out. And in those questions, you'll find out how they respond, and typically candidates do not like that because it's not interactive, but our clients love it, and because you get to see the candidate in a new light. So we'll have all that information. We'll sit down and review candidates tentatively. Obviously, we want to set a date where everybody can make it. If somebody's out of town, or we need to work around your schedules to when we set the final date for meeting with you all to present the semifinalists. And then at that point, I think we start nailing down the details of the public process and the process for interviews and what steps you're going to take. We then, once you've decided on a group of finalists, we then start doing the vetting of the background checks, the reference checks, the scans, the social media, and the nexus searches of their public exposure in the past, and we start putting together a final report. We have them do some written materials, and we can even have some other exercises that as incorporated into the interview process that we'll talk about at that semifinalist stage exactly what you all want to do, because it's your process, and but we're going to give you best advice based on experience that we've had. We would then approximately according to this schedule, in early August, identify the best time frame for holding those interviews, and then hopefully at that point, following the interviews, you would identify a selected candidate that you're looking for, and there in our mind, we don't presuppose who's going to be a valid or a qualified candidate. If there's internal candidates, great, we always encourage it. But I would strongly recommend that an internal candidate go through the exact same vetting process that every external candidate would go through. And we're gonna really kind of reach out and touch base with a lot of folks, not just in Michigan, but around the Great Lakes, around the country. And this is a premier city management job in the country, and I know you all know that too. So I guess I'd open that up for questions, Mayor.
Yeah, two thoughts, Art. I think probably all of us have been contacted by individuals who have recommendations or individuals they think would be great that we should actively recruit. And so if we have names of individuals that we've heard from people or that we know of, should we just send those to you? And then secondly, if there are individuals in the community who want to talk to you directly about potential candidates, can we share your contact information?
Absolutely, it'll be all over the profile in the brochure. But yes, or if you want to route it through Anita, and she can get it to me as well, but feel free to email me as well. So.
Okay, great. And then my second question, and this is probably more for the commission. You know, as we get closer, you know, as it comes June, and we want to really start to flesh out the process, do you all prefer to have a subcommittee of this body work with Art to make the recommendation on the process to the full commission? You know, last time I think we tried to do a lot of that by email. I'm not sure that was the best approach. So I'm just opening it up for your preference. We could pull together a subcommittee and have 3 of us work in partnership as we flesh out, you know, interview questions, public process, second round interview, and then make that recommendation to the full commission. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't like the idea of doing it by email. I think that's difficult. So to have a subcommittee at least look at it and talk to Art
And with
as
our city
well.
attorney.
Yes, to, you know, consider different options. We've had several different options that we've employed for hiring an attorney, clerk, and parks, and going out to the community to try to think through what might be the best, just particularly in the summer. You know, maybe we use this facility, I don't know, but I would like to see it, you know, a face-to-face conversation with Art and the city attorney about how best to do that, and probably with Amy too, because there'll be communication necessary.
Yeah, and that communication piece I think is critical, and I think we all saw that from last time. And I know some of you have talked to me about wanting to make sure, even leading up to when we interview, to do some education about the role of the city manager. It seemed like during the last process there was some blurring of lines and some misunderstanding of the role of the commission versus the city manager, and we want to make sure that that's really clear as we go into interviews, that the scope of this job is significant, and there's a role that we play as an elected body, and there's a role the city manager plays, and making sure that that's really clear. So we'll work on that kind of proactive communication and education as well. And I know Amy has already thought through some of that. So commissioners, any other thoughts? We can identify a subcommittee now. And we can talk about that as I get closer. If some of you want to volunteer for that, I would gladly invite you to join me to work with Art as we nail down a process. Commissioner O'Connor?
I'd welcome the opportunity to be part of the subcommittee.
Okay. Anyone else want to volunteer?
I can talk to Dave, but
Okay.
he doesn't know.
Okay, great.
I do have a question.
Eric, this may be a question for you. The week, Wednesday, June 13th is a deadline for us to review applicants or something like that. Where does that fall in the schedule for a budget review? I know we have a robust budget review, but we'll be voting in June too, so I'm not sure.
Well,
It's
that
the
actually,
12th.
Yep, it's
this
the
is
day after.
actually for us to start.
Oh, this is internally, that June 13th?
Yes, this is just our company.
Okay.
Just to let you know where we start kind of digging deep into the candidate pool, and I'm sorry to confuse you.
No, that's okay. So by that date, we'll receive something from you?
No.
Okay.
That's just the internal notification that we start digging deeper into their backgrounds.
Okay.
And kind of, we'd already started for the most part, but there's always late submittals. The last 2 or 3, 4 days, there, you know, sometimes you get a flurry, and that's when we really start, anybody that's even remotely qualified, we start pursuing additional information from them. And that's just kind of a reminder to us.
Okay.
I didn't mean to
That's okay.
confuse you by putting it there. But then we come back to you with kind of what we think are the final most qualified we'll send you the information a week prior. At least a week prior, so you got plenty of time to review candidates and videos and all of that, before the July 10th. It looks like we would start sending you information sometime during that week of June 25th, 26th, 27th. We'd send it to you so you have full 2 weeks to review, according to this schedule, the candidates and really get some time to soak in some of their backgrounds, because it's, there's a lot of information to, as you all know, to go through.
Yeah.
It's
And commissioners, that will also give us time to do our own vetting. I know a lot of us know people in other cities, and we can always make informal contacts to
Well, and
some of our
I'd be
connections.
careful at that point, depending on whether we disclosed.
Good
You know,
point.
if we haven't disclosed their name as an applicant at that point,
Then
then
we shouldn't do that.
we just need to, at whatever point, you know, we've disclosed publicly and they're aware of that, but I'd hate to
that's-
surprise any of our candidates
That's a
with
good
that.
point. So our city attorney is also telling me to be
Cautious.
mindful of confidentiality. So maybe at that point, so just so we're really clear about what lines we can and cannot cross, maybe we as a subcommittee will want to meet before that June 27th week. So maybe we'll meet after the budget, and we can talk through process. And then we'll make sure that we know as a body what we can and can't do.
Yeah.
And what's private and confidential, and then when information is made public.
Good idea.
Yes, because we want to be really respectful of the candidates and their
Well, we don't
desire
want
for
we don't want
anonymity.
the really good ones to withdraw.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And Mayor, and I don't know, Art, you having been a city manager, so any input that you can give us around the education of the role of the city manager, or that you've maybe seen other cities to do, that would be helpful. I know the whole United States is in a different mindset now in terms of engagement, which is a great thing. So I don't know if this is something that was maybe requested before, but I think it is something our community would appreciate having. So any input you have in that regard would be very helpful.
Sure.
Yeah. So Commissioners, I will work on getting a date on our schedule for the subcommittee to meet, and maybe we'll even meet earlier in June or even May with Art to kind of think through the decision points that we need to make, just so that we can start thinking through it. And then we can meet again in June to solidify that and make a recommendation to the full commission. Does that sound good? Okay, I'll get two dates on our schedule. And you can always, I know you're not in Michigan, so we can even figure out if you can do a conference call
yeah.
or Skype or something like that.
That's easy.
Okay. All right. So Commissioners, this, I think, addresses the concern about making sure that we're able to give our full attention to the budget. And then once the budget is adopted, we can really shift our primary focus to the city manager search. And wrap this up in August. I know we want to have a offer to someone in August, especially if they have children, to give them time to make plans to get their kids enrolled in school and things like that, and plan for a move. And so we'll try to be mindful of that as well.
Well, and I understand and know this, we've got to make sure we've got a really strong pool of candidates for
Yes.
your consideration, and we got to get it right, and we will.
Yes.
Thanks, Art.
All right, Commissioners, any other questions or comments for Art? So Commissioners, Art's here all day. He flies out tomorrow. And so if you haven't had a chance to talk to him and you want to, and you can squeeze in some time today, he's available for that. If you wanted a follow-up meeting with him after your phone conversation with him, again, he's open to meeting with any of you today. Hopefully he'll have a chance also to sit down with our city attorney just to talk through, make sure that we are really clear about Open Meetings Act, what's allowed, what's not, just so that we're well informed too as we move forward. So, thank you, Art.
Great.
Appreciate you coming all this way on short notice, and
All right.
we look forward to working with you.
Great.
Great.
Looking
thanks.
forward to it. Thank you.
All right, so next on the agenda is a presentation of the Youth Interaction Policy. And I'll turn to our chief. And I think he has, some members from our task force here with him today. So I'll just let him take this away. Commissioners, hopefully all of you received a copy of the draft policy.
Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning.
Commissioners, City Manager. So we appreciate the opportunity this morning to share with you the first tangible outcome of our Public Safety Task Force, that being the youth policy. Before introducing Mr. Raynard Ross and Deputy Chief Payne to cover the policy, I want to recognize everyone who has taken the time to sit on this policy. It's myself, Deputy Chief Payne, Mr. Ross, Marcus Bean, Janae Brower, Sonia Forte, Ed Kettle, Maria Morena Maria Moreno Reyes, Hugh Martin Robinson, Captain Maycroft, Lieutenant Bilesma, Sergeants Forner and Adams, and Officer Andy Bingle. I think it really goes to the spirit of this collaboration that this policy was drafted unanimously after a very robust discussion. So without further ado, I'll introduce Raynard Ross and DC Payne. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Welcome. And I'll add my thanks to both of you for your service.
Well, thank you, Mayor, Commissioners, allowing us to present this policy. Our department always recognized our interaction with youth. Over the last year, it became evident that we needed additional protective measures for the youth with police interaction. With that said, we started looking at different policies throughout the country that were geared toward youth and police interactions. Command staff started developing the policy. It was eventually reviewed by several different groups, and I would like to mention those. The West Michigan Branch for Advocate and Leaders for Police and Community Trust, known as ALLPAC, Grand Rapids Association of Pastors, and more importantly, we took it to the youth. The chief has a group called the Impact Advisory Group, and after we thought we had a good policy set up, we showed it to them, and they actually offered some input, which we incorporated into the youth, into the policy on their recommendations. Eventually, it went to the 21st Century Police, the subject matter experts. They also had their input on it, and then the group on May 7th came together, which the chief mentioned, not just police officers or the command staff, but it was people or officers of all ranks, the two police unions, along with the citizens that are part of the 21st Century Review Task Force. And as the chief mentioned, after a very robust conversation, very good conversation, we unanimously approved this or agreed upon this should be the policy moving forward for the police department. At this point, Mr. Ross will go over the policy with you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Mayor Bliss, City Commission, thank you for having me. Deputy Chief Payne just gave you a good overview of our process, but for the sake of the audience, if you don't mind, I guess I will simply read the policy. I believe you guys have it, but again, for the sake of others in the room. So the purpose of the policy is the Grand Rapids Police Department recognizes the impact of its involvement with youth. While youth are afforded the same constitutional protections as adults, GRPD acknowledges and appreciates the need for additional protective measures while encountering youth. Now, the goals of the policy are twofold. Number one is to recognize that youth are still in the stage of developing and learning and may have already experienced trauma that is shaping their behavioral response. Two, to recognize that the formal juvenile justice process should be avoided unless clearly indicated by the youth's behavior and unless alternatives do not exist. Now, as far as particular procedures to guide officers' actions on the ground, first is that officers should take the following factors, if known, into consideration when interacting with youth, including but not limited to the nature of the complaint or contact, including probability of possessing a weapon, the age, intelligence, mental capacity, and physical condition of the youth, prior contacts or histories with officers, the likelihood to comply with parental control, the cooperation and attitude of all parties and the likelihood of the offense being repeated, likelihood that the youth can be successfully referred to a supporting social service agency. The second general procedure is when interacting with youthful offenders, officers should consider a wide range of alternatives and select the most reasonable and least restrictive alternative consistent with public safety, officer safety, maintenance of public order, department policy, and the rights of the youth, including but not limited to a warning with no enforcement action taken, referring the youth and parent or guardian to a diversion program similar to the Bridge or HQ, a citation, which would simply be for municipal civil infractions and traffic citations, a referral to family court in lieu of a custodial arrest, or a custodial arrest with lodging at the Kent County Juvenile Detention Center. The third procedure, if a youth has been patted down, searched, or handcuffed, officers shall notify the youth's parent or guardian. The notification may be either in person or by telephone and shall be documented in the field interrogation or incident report, along with the identity of the parent or guardian who was notified. If the officer is unable to notify a parent or guardian, every attempt shall be documented in the field interrogation or incident report. 4, when safe, under the totality of the circumstances, officers shall consider a youth's age, whether known or objectively apparent to a reasonable officer, when determining whether or not to apply handcuffs or restraints. And the fifth and final procedure is if during a preliminary investigation or contact, it is determined that a youth is not a suspect, all efforts should be made to ensure the youth is not left unattended for the duration. These efforts shall be documented in the incident report and may include, but are not limited to, placing the youth with a non-offending parent or guardian, utilizing appropriate resources such as Children's Protective Services or the Domestic Assault Response Team, or assigning an officer to the youth when reasonable and practical. So that is the policy word for word. Obviously, you folks had it, but I did read that for the audience. And at this point, if you have any particular questions or comments, Deputy Chief and I will do our best to respond to those.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, questions? I think many of us have given feedback already. Commissioner Jones, were you turning your mic on?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you for your for the work that has been put into this. I'm curious to find out, not to be specific, but how much of the feedback from the youth helped to revise the document policy?
Again, they've reviewed it and went over it. One of the areas that they felt was important to include in the policy, under C1A, including the possibility of possession of a weapon. Mm-hmm. They felt that that should be included in there. But there was a lot of dialogue with them, and we went back and forth with them, but that was one of the more important ones that they felt strongly should be included in the policy.
Unpack that for me, if you will. So they were stating that when engaging or when coming in contact with youth, that the officers should assume that the youth or that the youth is possessing a weapon?
Go ahead.
No, not so much that. Actually, surprisingly, those young people had a good sense of recognizing the importance of officer safety as well. Mm-hmm. So they recognize that if there's a probability of a weapon, I don't want to say that all other bets are off, but they recognize that that was a key factor that an officer should include when engaging with anyone, and that frankly a youth with a weapon shouldn't get a pass, I guess to put it simply.
Interesting. Commissioner, did you have a follow-up question?
No.
No? Okay. Commissioner?
Yeah, I'm wondering, under general procedures, how quickly can some of this information be obtained? Is it relayed to officers from dispatch? I see quite a list, prior contacts, age, for example, any issues around mental capacity. How do they find that out so quickly, or can they?
Go ahead. Yeah, Commissioner, that's by the dispatch updating officers when they receive call. They're asking questions. Once the officers are on scene, they get further information from witnesses. So it's kind of dynamic. I mean, it's ever evolving. The more information the officers receive, it helps them it furthers them in their decision-making process on how the contact will go.
Okay, so that's ongoing and dynamic. And number one under goals, the first one, to recognize that youth are still in the stage of developing and learning. It brings me back to some training that I had around nonviolent crisis intervention in GRPS. Do we have that for our officers? Because I know that, for example, there's the mental health first aid training to help to try to to tell if somebody is in crisis or not. But in terms of youth, how to approach them, I recall that we had to approach them hands open, never arms crossed. I mean, it's a whole different situation with a police officer with a uniform, of course. But is there training to help recognize some of that, particularly people who've experienced trauma, because they can respond so differently?
We recognize that, and I wanted to add that this policy in and of itself is not what we're doing to address these issues. We're looking at best practices around the country. So that is something that we are currently looking at. I'll mention the Milo system, which is due to be upgraded. As far as our training, it's the interactive decision-making process that we have. That's being upgraded to include youth in that, which we did not have before. This policy in and of itself, we've already incorporated some of that youth interaction in our recent use of force certification. So this policy does not stand alone.
Right.
We're continuing to look at best practices, and that is one area that we're looking at.
That's great. And then I have one final question on the these options, placing youth with a non-offending parent, utilizing appropriate resources. I know we talked before about some cities that had, within the police department itself, had someone who deals with crisis intervention. I think, Mayor, you mentioned Denver. Have we looked at anything like that? Or is the 21st Century Policing model looking at that as well?
So you're referring to the crisis intervention teams, and I know
Yeah.
that the chief is a part of a consortium within the county looking at CIT, which I think is probably separate from this, but clearly
Could be used.
intertwined.
Yeah.
That's a great answer, Mayor. So yes, we are training the CIT. Sergeant John Winkowski serves as our liaison. So we've been undergoing training with a lieutenant from Kalamazoo who's got a law degree, who's been bringing some additional crisis intervention training to the GRPD, and we'll continue that till everyone in the department has been trained.
Great, thanks, chief.
Well, thank you so much for all the work that you've both done on this, that all of you have done, and for recognizing the task force and all these different groups. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner Lanier?
Yes, thank you so much for presenting and the work that has gone into the creation of this policy. The policy was requested by Commissioner Jones after the incident with Honesty Hodges. So I'm curious to know, how would Honesty's situation have been changed based on this policy? In addition to her situation, the circumstances surrounding the 5 boys who were leaving the Kroc Center, I think that incident also was a part of why this policy was being recommended. So I'm curious to know, based on that, or those circumstances, those scenarios, what would be different based on this policy?
Well, I would say that although those 2 incidents have been somewhat linked together, I will say that the Kroc incident and the Honesty incident really have a pretty different set of circumstances, if you would. But I guess I will start with the honesty piece, and obviously Deputy Chief will chime in. But with the Milo system that he referred to, and I know most of you are probably familiar, but that's the simulation system that officers use to help affect their decision making. Obviously, at this point, there had not been, as Deputy Chief mentioned, a youth component associated with that. So when you talk about those split-second decisions and taking into the totality of circumstances, this policy, like you said, itself doesn't stand alone, but the training element that will undergird this would ideally, at least, would have put that officer in a scenario that was somewhat similar. With an opportunity to have that 20/20 hindsight to really unpack his or her decision-making in the context of the scenario that's presented to him. Now, whether there will be a scenario that mimics the scenario in which Ms. Hodges was involved in, that's, I can't say that. But in short, though, it's the training component that gives an officer an opportunity to kind of look back and unpack his or her decision-making, talk that through with his or her colleagues. But then the policy language itself definitely indicates that the goal above all else is to take that totality of circumstances into consideration before making a decision to cuff and whatnot. So I won't sit here and say that this policy alone will be foolproof and that we will never have such an incident. I'm optimistic that we won't, but I think it would be unfair and borderline foolish to say that it's 100% preventable. But I do think with the guidelines here and the training associated with it, that it's highly unlikely that we'd have a similar situation. Now, of course, Deputy Chief can speak to any particulars.
Well, it also codifies, I mean, some of these things were already in existing policy. Now it's in one policy. It also helps us meet one of our CALEA standards, which is the accreditation process we're going through. So now we have a separate standalone policy that officers can refer to, and as Mr. Ross mentioned, the training. You take all those things together, I think we're in better shape than what we were before.
So, I'm actually looking for specifics, I'm sorry, but, so what in the policy will cause there to be change in behavior? So maybe the question is, because there is a training that you're mentioning, this policy will induce some training, and that training will then help for that incident to not occur the way it occurred in the past. So what training, what from the policy will be a part of the training? I'm just trying to get to something specific, because I think that's what the public will want to know. How can a parent know that their child will not experience what these other children have experienced based on this policy is kind of the question. And I think you're right, Deputy Chief, that, and we talked about this before, that many of the items here in this policy were things that were already in place. So what's significant to the change, if we can kind of get that specific?
Well, I'm going to point to under the general procedures, number 2, where it states that when interacting with youthful offenders, officers should consider a wide range of alternatives and select the most reasonable and least restrictive alternative consistent with public safety, officer safety, maintenance of public order, department policy, and the rights of the youth. So I think that statement there, as Deputy Chief pointed out, it sort of codifies the fact that that is the goal, that is the objective. And I guess as a former police officer, I look at this and I try to reflect on how it would impact my decision making. And I think that putting this on paper, now of course, there's always the human factor. Not every officer sees everything obviously the same all the time, so there's always that human element. But I think putting this on paper sort of streamlines or sort of controls for that human element, if you would. I think putting this on paper, going into a situation, this is clearly a goal and objective of the officer when he or she is interacting with a young person. So I really think, really just like Deputy Chief said, it sort of codifies what was already in existence. And, it's just a matter of really providing some stronger guidelines, I suppose. I don't know if that's the specific that maybe you were looking for, but I think that general procedure, number 2 there, is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, from my perspective at least.
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty subjective, the number 2 that you just read. And I'm asking because I know I'll be asked. And at this point, I'm not sure that I can answer the question.
Yeah.
So whatever it is that we can do to help equip me personally, if no one else is experiencing
Indeed.
what I'm experiencing, but I want to be able to fully respond to what this policy is going to do for the children in this city and how they'll be positively impacted because we have this new policy.
Yeah, and I will say that when Chief Rahinsky mentioned the robust conversation that went on in the room, the comments were similar to what you're offering. As community members, we felt compelled to as well to be able to leave the room and feel like there was something meaty of sorts to hold on to. And again, the conversation was intense. And I think really what it came down to is it's just really difficult to put firm parameters around situations in which the human element just provides countless variables.
Sure.
And again, we went back and forth of sorts quite a bit. But I think at the end of the day, we were really just comfortable and confident as a larger unit that it would be a bit compromising to some other key factors like public safety and officer safety to put more definitive language to some degree. Not that it wasn't desired, but the balance of the, again, when you talk about public safety and officer safety, that was just an element that to really put something really definitive is really difficult because, again, the variables are infinite, really, when you talk about, interactions with the public. And but I do understand exactly where you're coming from. I do. I'm definitely not trying to dog and pony show you. I totally understand where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, we just realized with the totality of all the variables associated with it, it would just be really difficult to put real specifics. So I guess to answer your question, when I'm asked that same question as I move forward, frankly, my response is going to be that the only thing I can offer is from my perspective that I do believe that the command staff that's in the room with us have a real commitment to changing how the department interacts with the general public, not changing it to the point where safety isn't priority number one, but changing it to the point where, when at all possible, the benefit of the doubt will be given to the public, particularly children. And that, I don't know, like I said, it is a difficult question, and it is one that I do expect to be asked, so I do empathize with where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, I just think that it was a matter of all the factors that we have to recognize, public safety as well and officer safety as well, that was really just difficult to put some real exhaustive specifics related to it. I don't know if Deputy Chief from a PD perspective may have some other thoughts, but.
No, I think you summed it up very well. It is a difficult question to answer. And as I mentioned, my hope moving forward, this puts us in a better position than what we were before with the policy and the training. And as Commissioner Kelly mentioned, the other things we're looking at, trauma to youth, it's something that it's our goal to give our officers the best tools and everything they can have so we can avoid the outcomes that we had on December 6th.
And I'll add something, and then I'll turn to Commissioner Jones. So I had a couple of conversations about this at the community meeting that was held with the task force. And Commissioner, I think all of us wrestle with that. This is a policy. I think the value of a policy, though, when it's coupled with training and really clear expectations about how we respond to youth, is that if, heaven forbid, there is an incident, or even when we're reviewing interactions with youth, the eye can be to whether the individual used the least restrictive alternative available, and so I think we need to look at it not just the policy. We need to look at the training. We need to look at how do we follow up. How do we be very intentional as we review interactions with youth for training purposes, but also in teaching, right? I worked with youth for a long time. I can tell you early in my career, if I could go back, I would have responded to little ones who were having meltdowns probably differently after I had more experience and more training. And I went through all that same training about, crisis intervention and least restrictive. And so I know it's a difficult situation that you're in, and you have to make split-second decisions. But when you have a clear policy, a clear expectation about how we interact with youth, and then extremely good training to back it up, you're able to really do a better job, in my opinion, both proactively, but also if an incident does happen.
And I'd also just like to also add that this is a start. This is sort of obviously the first stab at this. And one thing I have been impressed with this work is the commitment by our command staff to regularly review policies and procedures even beyond this commission. So, after this is in place for a bit, if there is a need, or when there is a need, because there will obviously experience will dictate edits as needed, and that'll obviously be reflected moving forward. So this is just a first step, likely not the last step, but again, a step that does codify some expectations, does clearly say to officers what the department and what the city expects of them as they go out and do their work. And then again, with the training component, the idea is that obviously we won't have situations similar to what we had before. But so we'll find out moving forward, frankly.
Yeah. Commissioner?
Yep. Excuse me. Wondering, this is not to rehash anything that's happened in the past, but I think, is it a fair statement to say that with both incidents that Commissioner Lanier made mention of, the officers involved had options with regards to protocol? Is that a fair statement to make, Deputy Chief, in terms of how they handled the situations, both with our 5 sons near Croc as well as Honesty? They had options around protocol?
The training that they've received and how to respond, I want to make sure I get your...
In other words, that wasn't they chose to address the situation the way in which they addressed it, but there were other options. Is that correct?
I'd probably separate the 2 incidents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly, the Honesty, there may have been other options,
Okay.
and they were taken.
Okay.
The Croc Center, in review of that, I believe that they used the appropriate options. That's from my training, from their training, what they did. So certainly in the Honesty circumstance, there could have been other options, and I think we saw that eventually, unfortunately, what occurred, and I think the sergeant stepped in and took the appropriate action.
Okay. The reason I ask is because when I look at the policy, that's actually how I view it. I view it as an option with regards to protocol. So they could have, I mean, if, to Commissioner Lanier's point, if there were a redo of the interaction with Honesty, there's the direction in which they did take. But this here is another option, correct?
Oh, I believe so, yes, definitely.
Yeah, and so that's encouraging, coupled with the fact that if it's something that is, it's going to be, it's made very much whole by way of training of the officers to, again, see this as a viable option. Because ultimately, I see all of this work that we're doing, whether it's with this or whether it's with the 21st Century Task Force, is this whole idea of changing culture and the idea of having or engaging other alternatives that will hopefully provide better outcomes, especially with regards to interaction with youth and interaction in historically marginalized communities. And so I wanted to make mention of that because I think this is something to build on. And I think what's critically important is that we continue to provide options around protocol. It shouldn't always just, again, I understand that some incidents, there's only one way to go, and I get that. But I think with incidents, with the very sensitive nature of the incidents that have occurred, I think there needs to be several options that will, again, give us the best outcomes, and not outcomes that ultimately lead to trauma for young people or for those who have been historically marginalized. So.
To your point, Commissioner Jones, I think one thing that is offered here, though, is that it prioritizes a least restrictive option.
Yes.
And I think that's really, again, kind of where the rubber meets the road with this, is that it puts that least restrictive option at the top of the list.
I'm looking for, yes.
And, so again, this is a start. Whether there will be changes moving forward, I would say it's likely. But again, it just really prioritizes that the least restrictive option be at the top of the list.
Very good.
Great. And I'll have one more comment by Commissioner Lanier, and then I'll wrap this up only because I'm looking at the agenda and I see some members of Public Safety already here, and I want to be really mindful that we're able to start that on time at 11:30. So Commissioner Lanier?
So this probably is a question for the chief, Chief Rahinsky, if it's at all possible to have a data set of prior incidents of juveniles, and then that could be our baseline, and then maybe we can look, because everything is still subjective, whether it's a lower option or not, it's still subjective. And perhaps maybe in 6 months, we can have a report that kind of outlines the base data alongside the data of what's transpired over the past 6 months with that same age group, in order to see if if this policy is changing the behaviors. Now, understanding that you have to go through training and creating that training and all of that, so that 6 months should probably start after the training occurs. But I think that'll be a way of seeing if this policy is making the impact that you're hoping that it'll make.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And maybe we can add that to be reviewed first by Public Safety. Chief, maybe you can pull together some data points that we could look at, maybe even going back 6 or 12 months based on what information we have about our responses to juveniles, and then we can track that moving forward to see if there's an impact. Yeah, it's a great idea. So final question is timeline for this. It's already been vetted, been reviewed. You're presenting it today. Does it go into effect immediately?
So it'll be distributed internally immediately.
Okay.
The discussions, the training, some of that has already taken place and it'll continue.
Right.
To reiterate, this is not a one and done. Policy is only as good as the training, the discussion, and how deliberate it'll be in terms of adhering to it and keeping consistent with the spirit of the policy. So it's an ongoing process, but in terms of releasing it, it'll be released today throughout the department.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief. Thank you, Reynard. Thank you, Deputy Chief.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to a very brief presentation on a recent 2017 Outstanding Traffic Safety Achievement Award, and I'll ask Chris Zoll to present this.
Good morning. Appreciate the
Morning.
opportunity. Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. So here we go. And I have a visual as well. If we can pull that up. So on behalf of the Grand Rapids Traffic Safety Department, now with Mobile GR, I want to give a quick update on our bike and ped campaigns that we'll be rolling out later this year. First, as some of you may already know from a recent media coverage, I'm proud to report that the Governor's Traffic Safety Advisory Commission has honored the City of Grand Rapids with the 2017 Outstanding Traffic Safety Achievement Award. This award is in recognition of the nationally heralded Driving Change Bicycle Safety Education Campaign. This is the first time that Grand Rapids has received this prestigious honor. The Driving Change campaign has also garnered some national news media coverage and honors from the League of American Bicyclists, the Public Relations Society of America, American Advertising Federation, and the Governor's Fitness Awards for Active Communities. We accepted the award last week at a ceremony in East Lansing as part of the 23rd Annual Michigan Traffic Safety Summit. This is a great achievement that reflects the hard work and dedication of the city staff and community partners that make Grand Rapids a great place to work, live, play, and ride. Based on the results that we're seeing after 2 years of the Driving Change campaign, we are confident that the implementing and continuing of the education effort is vital to reducing the frequency and severity of bike crashes. We're going to kick off this year's 2018 Driving Safety Campaign on April 30th here in City Hall. We welcome you all to attend. In addition, we'll be announcing that during the April 30th press conference that we'll be launching our second annual Pedestrian Safety Campaign. The Pedestrian Safety Campaign will highlight the new ordinance the Commission approved last month that requires drivers to stop for pedestrians at crosswalks. The goal of the campaign is to lower Grand Rapids' higher than state average pedestrian-involved crashes with motor vehicles. The new ordinance calls on motorists to fully stop for pedestrians at marked and unmarked crosswalks, except at intersections where the movement of traffic is regulated by a police officer or a traffic signal. In those cases, you will need to wait for the walk signal to be able to cross. Both the Bike Safety Campaign and the Ped Safety Campaigns are part of the city's Vision Zero initiative. Our objective is to eliminate traffic-related fatalities and serious injuries by promoting safe driving behaviors and addressing pedestrians' vulnerability when crossing city streets. The new crosswalk ordinance has generated a lot of attention in the news, and you may receive questions from your constituents about this change. To ensure that the message is being delivered consistently, we're planning on several grassroots education activities this year to inform people about the rules of the road. We presented this last week to the Neighborhood Association meeting, and they've invited us to do individual presentations with their constituents through their local association meetings. You will also be seeing a story in the next issue of We Are GR. We will be sharing with you some of the materials that we distributed to the neighborhood associations so that you can answer the questions in the same way that we are. You should know that we're also looking to partner again with the Grand Rapids area student driving training companies such that the pedestrian components will be a part of their training curriculum along with the bike safety as well. So we will provide you more updates as the campaign continues to move forward this year. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Thank you, Chris. No, this is great. I think we all know the importance of this work, especially with recent tragedies, and so we appreciate it. Thanks, and congratulations.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, next that will take us to a presentation of our fiscal 2019 Emergency Solutions Grants, ESG funding recommendations, and I think I'll just call the next one up too, presentation of the 2019 Neighborhood Investment Plan funding recommendations. And these are the recommendations, commissioners, that came from the subcommittee that worked with Connie to bring forward these recommendations to us. All right, great. Commissioner?
I will ultimately be recusing myself from these items as my employer is listed as one of the grantees, and so I will not be providing any comment or engaging in any activity at all with these two items. So.
Great, thank you, Commissioner, for saying that. This is a presentation, so when it does come back to us to vote, I'll make sure that we say that again. So thank you. All right.
Great.
Connie?
Well, thank you. Since we're taking them together, it does make it a little bit easier to explain what's gone on. It's kind of been a wild ride, as you know. Our federal program levels were not approved at the time that this was written. Congress had a budget that they were working on and had not been adopted or signed by the president. Since this was submitted to you, that has changed, and our federal program levels have been established for the Community Development Block Grant Program, HOME, and ESG. In those cases, CDBG and the HOME programs are anticipating a slight increase in funding, and the ESG program, however, is proposed to have a, I shouldn't say proposed, has been adopted to have a small decrease. In our recommendations, however, we had to bring them forward to you and keep moving the process forward because it takes so much time to go through all the comment periods and to make sure that when we do get those actual allocations, we can submit them on a timely basis so that the programs can get started.
And commissioners, I'm not sure all of you followed the crazy federal budget process that we just went through, but originally both of these funds, CDBG and HOME, were proposed to have significant cuts. And we were very happy to see that not only were they at the same levels, but in some instances increased slightly. So.
Exactly. So in both cases, both of these items represent the activities that would occur in the third year of our 5-year regional housing and community development consolidated plan. I will start with giving some highlights of the, go ahead and do the ESG recommendations for you. We did a request for qualifications for strength-based case management services. And the Coalition to End Homelessness is our partner in putting these recommendations together. They actually have a funding review committee who makes preliminary recommendations that then gets taken to a steering committee who's also then approved those to bring forward to you today. And unfortunately, Angela Gillespie was here today and has had to leave before the presentation. So overall, we are planning at last year's level and then have some contingency provisions built in. So if there was an increase or decrease, and obviously for the ESG program, we would adopt those decreased contingency provisions. We attempted to continue to support the concept of having a financial assistance fund that also provides case management services within that. And so the breakdown of that would be just over $225,000, which would be support the financial assistance fund, just over $61,000, which continues our coordinated entry work, and then the remainder, which is the 7.5% that's allowed for the city's administrative dollars. The agencies that submitted and would have reservations in the financial assistance fund include the Grand Rapids Urban League and Community Rebuilders, along with the Salvation Army. And then we also have, for homelessness prevention, funds in there for the 61st District Eviction Prevention Program. So as you may recall, that program, the way that it's structured, there is some local dollars that go in to support payments for that, for those who may be facing eviction. And we currently are using ESG funds for that program as well. When we get our final numbers for HUD, or from HUD, we will come back to you with a resolution that will ask you to establish the final award amounts. And it's proposed that in the contingency provisions that a decrease would be spread proportionally within that financial assistance fund. So do you have any questions?
All right, Commissioners, I think we've all had an opportunity to review these. Commissioner Lanier?
Thank you so much, Connie, for that detailed summary of, is it 3 or 4 items? I do have a quick question, and I'm going to the agenda now because I think the spreadsheet was a part of the
Yes.
agenda item. I was wondering if there's a way to add a column to the spreadsheet that talks about the number of, and maybe it's too late for this because you'd have to go to all of the service providers, but I think that was all in that binder. To talk about the impact that we're making because of the funding that we have in the community. So, how many people avoided eviction and things of that nature. I think it would be great for the community to see the impact of the dollars that we're.
So this is the proposed activities and dollar amounts. So the annual action plan, which is submitted, once you make your formal allocation levels, that gets put into our annual action plan, which is out there in a draft form based on this information. And it tells you how many units would be provided with that dollar amount of that service. It tells you the geography intended throughout the city. And then at the end of every fiscal year, federal program fiscal year, of the consolidated plan, the fiscal year for that, we submit an annual report talking about accomplishments. So June 30th of every year, we start to roll up all the numbers, and in the fall, we submit that's called a CAPER, Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report.
So I'm wondering if there is a way, because this will be part of a public hearing, and I understand that we have all of the information and when and how it is disseminated, but I think it'll be easier in this kind of chart format for people to see that that we're considering funding again, the impact that those organizations have already made, so that then the community can see, why it's important to continue
Could
funding.
easily point them to that document that's in
Okay.
place right now. It's out
Okay.
on the city's website.
Okay.
Does that work?
Sure.
Yeah. I think, Connie, to follow up on that too, we should,
Because it's mentioned in there.
these dollars are so critical to neighborhoods and neighborhood development and strengthening neighborhoods. I think it would be worthwhile to get that information out to neighborhoods as well, that they can share with their networks in a real user-friendly way, or maybe even do an article for newsletters or a press release that we can send out to them.
Okay.
So, Commissioner?
Yeah, I brought this up last year, and I'm going to bring it up again this year. As we look at the funding allocation, we have $1.3 million worth of CDBG general fund dollars allocated to code enforcement. And I know code enforcement is extremely important, and we often need more code enforcement, but using almost $1.4 million to subsidize bad actors, and just trying to think, how can you reimagine how you can use those CDBG dollars to do things to promote good activities, right? Like we continue to talk about affordable housing, we continue to talk about wanting to support neighborhoods, to support development. And, again, we're spending a significant amount of our allocation to support bad actors. And it doesn't sit well with me that we do that, especially given the fact that we're supposed to be a full cost recovery model. And we subsidize a department $1.4 million that's not actually collecting the full cost of their doing their business. And I know it's what it's always been, and so I'm going to bring it up again in hopes that we can talk about it and try to figure out a way to do it differently.
Yeah, I mean, we do bring this up almost every year, and I think the challenge and balance is that, and we all know this, I know it more from when I was a commissioner, a lot of the complaints we get are about not even being happy with the level of code enforcement that we're currently providing. So I guess I'll turn to Connie and Eric maybe to speak to that a little bit.
I'll go first.
I just had my budget review, so.
Yeah. So it subsidizes about half of the cost of code enforcement, this amount. So we do recover costs for others. And one of the other questions we get is, it's a very complicated thing because we have to look at what are the cost to people who are ultimately fined or don't conform. And so we've got, you're right in the sense that we are using these dollars to correct things in the community which sometimes lead to enforcement, which you characterize as bad actors. We'd like everybody not to do that, but occasionally we have to do that. So it's about half and half, and if we didn't use the CDBG dollars, if we were going to continue the service, we'd have to use general fund dollars, which would then compete with other general fund services. So in the prioritization that we've done in the past, we've tried to hit a balance here between keeping costs reasonable for residents. This is community development because it does help maintain the quality of neighborhoods, and and if you compare our housing quality and neighborhood quality to other cities who don't have active code enforcement, there's a marked difference. So I guess I understand your point totally, and.
But you hit the nail on the head though. There's a market difference, right? And if I get a speeding ticket or a parking ticket, I'm required to pay the cost of doing that business. And so if I get a violation on my property, then I should be responsible to pay for the violation on my property in the capacity that it costs to service that problem. There's no fund out there to supplement my parking tickets if I get them.
Yeah, I think the flip side of that, and we had this conversation a couple of years ago when I served on the subcommittee, is that we already have a lot of families living in poverty in our community. And if anything, I would like us to think of a really creative, proactive way to come alongside people who are living in poverty who have code violations and partner with them to fix them instead of being punitive and fine them.
But I mean, again, I think that was part of the conversation we had around the Affordable Housing Fund, right? There's an impetus to want to ensure that people who live in affordable housing can stay in affordable housing, right? Keep staying in your home is important, but that's why we set those funds aside to support people who don't have the means and resources to be able to deal with those things at the place that they're at. And so, again, I just think there needs to be a deeper dive into understanding how these numbers work and how the revenue really is generated and who really is paying the cost of these fees, because you can't tell me that of $1.3 million worth of code enforcement that it's only, all that goes to support low-income people who are staying in, or that need help staying in their home. I'm sure there's some people out there that, aren't following the law, aren't following our code, and, have the means to be able to pay the fine in the event that they don't do right. So.
Yeah, I'll turn to other members of the subcommittee. I don't know if you talked about this when you had your meetings and were reviewing the funds.
We didn't this year, but it has been kind of a reoccurring conversation, and I think the key point is reimagining what to do with the dollars, right, as opposed to looking at what's happening in code enforcement. And I think, I really do think that that's a staffing suggestion for Connie and her team and Eric to kind of take a look at to see what are some other options.
So one of the questions I've asked Connie to look at is how do you achieve the objectives of code enforcement in a different way? So which kind of reimagining how we do that. And we have good dedicated people who are following the rules that we have and doing it well. But is there another way to accomplish the same outcome that might end up with fewer unintended consequences? And so that's the piece that we want to look at, and that was actually Connie's equity example this year in her budget. So we can talk about that more during budget review. If you'd like.
Sounds good.
So.
Okay.
Mayor, could I just take a minute to do a high-level summary of the CDBG and home recommendations? Because we started having
Yes,
this
I will give
conversation
you
before
like
that.
3 minutes to do that, Connie, and then I'm going to move on.
So in essence, everything pretty much has been recommended at the current levels, except for a few things. One has to do with the city's housing rehabilitation program, because there's a recommendation that there's increased funds there, because we actually had to close the program in January because all the funds are committed. And so in previous years, years past, that was a much higher level of funding for that program, and we've used that to balance and to make sure that we didn't have to cut our nonprofit partners in the past, and we now are at a point that it's affecting our ability to serve those who need to make home improvements. We also really concentrated on the outcome to increase the supply of affordable housing. So we are proposing that there not be any resources put into the infrastructure fund this year, but those dollars in fact be used for affordable housing development projects and supplement those which is typically funded with home dollars. For new projects. And so in total, these recommendations would support an additional 113 affordable housing units to be developed if they were approved as recommended. One thing that we did not recommend any funding for in these initial recommendations are for two organizations who wanted to do single-family acquisition, development, and resale projects. There's funds remaining in their existing contracts, so we did not add any to these recommendations. And then, so any other changes? I think those would be the changes. And then when we talk about contingency provisions, as HUD has requested us to do, again, that had to identify if there's an increase or a decrease. And we know that CDBG and home will be increased. We just don't have that final dollar amount yet, and HUD has up to 60 days to provide that to us. And there is contingency language in here for increases as well. This information was made available to the public on Friday, and we have a public hearing scheduled on April 10th for all the funding sources and our annual action plan. And as soon as we get those final numbers from HUD, we will then bring it forward to you after that 30-day public comment period and ask you to pass a resolution that sets the award levels, and then we will submit that to HUD as for our application for funding.
Okay, great. Thank you, Connie. All right, Commissioners, I'm going to take us along to our next item. This is a resolution scheduling our special meetings of the City Commission for our budget. So before you, you have a proposed schedule for our budget sessions. I believe Outlook invites have already gone out to the full commission. Is that right?
Yes, I have.
And so can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, Commissioners, any questions, comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving a memorandum of understanding and escrow agreement with Police Chief Rahinsky. Can I get a motion? All right, Eric, you want to speak to this I think all of us have been briefed on this because we've been working on it for several months, but do you want to briefly talk about it?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. We've actually been working on this for a couple of years.
Years. Time flies.
And we are making good progress, and so this would help us make further progress by entering into an MOU regarding the treatment of Social Security withholdings and allow for the accumulation of those dollars for payment when it's ultimately approved by the Social Security Administration. So we've been working with the City Attorney and Special Counsel on this, and we'll work with the Comptroller's Office in actually making this happen once the MOU is approved. So we've have achieved a allocation of responsibility that we're all comfortable with, and I recommend that we proceed with this MOU.
Okay, great. Commissioners, any questions? All right. trying to make this right. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries.
Thank
All
you.
right, next that will, thank you. Next that will take us to a resolution to approve amendment number 40 to add Village of Caledonia as a member of the Grand Valley Metro Council.
Moved. Support.
All right, Asante, you want to speak to this? This is, Commissioners, this is standard operating procedure whenever there's a new municipality or entity that wants to join the Metro Council. Every member of the Metro Council has to have a resolution to approve that before it goes back and is finalized.
Exactly.
Did I miss anything, Asante? Sorry. Serving on the Metro Council, I thought I would make sure that I shared that with you. This was discussed at our last Metro Council meeting. The Metro Council approved it, so every representative who represents a city or a county or a township or a village is looking at this same resolution that they will be working on approving as an elected body as well.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thanks. Any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Sorry I stole your thunder, Asante. All right, next we have a resolution approving call taking and fire dispatching contract. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support?
All right, Eric, you want to tell us about this?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mayor. So this is a contract between us and the Kent County Dispatch Authority that would provide for the payment of dollars to the city for dispatching fire service. And so this was a provision of the ballot question that was approved by voters in November of 2016, which provides for two things. One was the construction of the 800 megahertz radio system to bring us up into modern times. And then the other is to pay for fire dispatch. And our allocation is estimated at $847,000 and some change in the first year, and will be paid to us annually for fire service. So I would recommend that we approve this agreement so we can begin receiving payment.
All right, Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, thank you for your negotiation on this. I know that it took some time with the dispatch to come up with a fair amount, so thank you. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving an industrial facilities exemption certificate for Fair's Coffee and Nut at 601 7th Street Northwest. Can I get a motion?
So moved?
Support.
All right. Jano, you want to tell us about this? I think we're all familiar with it because we had a public hearing, but.
Very good. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Yeah, just briefly, since you've seen this before and held a public hearing, application for a 12-year industrial facilities exemption certificate for Ferris Coffee and Nut, which is relocating from 227 Winter to 601 First, former American Seating property. They invest $7.5 million in the property, $1.7 million in equipment. They bring 6 new employees to Grand Rapids and retain 85 and a half people in the city already. They locate on the west side in the West Side Corridor Improvement District, which is supportive, that authority is supportive of this project. So happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, questions? All right, no questions. I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, and I'll have John stay up there for the next one. It's a resolution approving the transfer of the personal property component of the industrial facilities exemption certificate. Again, this is for Fair's Coffee and Nut.
So moved.
Support.
All right. Anything to add on this?
Just that this is a transfer of the personal property that's already subject to an industrial facilities exemption at their current location that they'll bring with them to their new location.
All right, great. Commissioners, any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution establishing the City of Grand Rapids South Division, Burton Hall, Granville Avenue Corridor Improvement Authority, the boundaries of the Corridor Improvement District, and designating the CID as a qualified development area.
So moved.
Support?
All right, Shalma, you want to tell us about this?
Yeah, sure. So this is a basic continuation of the creation of the city's 6th Corridor Improvement District. That is the South Division, Burton Hall, and Granville Corridor Improvement Authority. What you have before you is a resolution approving its actual establishment, establishing the boundaries of the Corridor Improvement District, and then also designating it as a qualified development area. There was a public hearing that was held on this on January 9th by the City Commission, and basically this is kind of the wind down in the first phase of its creation. After this approval today, we'll hopefully have personal information forms for a proposed board within the next couple weeks, and basically begin the process and planning out the actual TIF engagement process and planning process on kind of putting that development plan together, of which we've been working with the planning department to kind of coordinate along with the area-specific plan that's been going along South Division.
Great. Thank you for all your work on this. Commissioners, anything to add, comments, questions? Commissioner Lanier?
Great work.
And same to you, Commissioner. Yeah, I know you put a lot of work into this.
This one I haven't spent so much time on because this is South Division, but
Yeah. Okay.
it's gonna be exciting though.
All right. Okay, so who is actively involved in this?
So right now it's been primarily the steering committee so it's been mainly our department steering committee, but we're going to be coordinating with Courtney as they do their ASP along South Division to kind of combine some of the engagement that we do, so it's not overwhelming for residents
Great.
and what have you.
And what commissioner is going to serve on this?
So I'm not.
Running out of.
First
One
ward.
of the first ward.
Yeah,
Tell us.
I think it's gonna be me. I mean, I'm in.
You're in. All right, Commissioner. So, great.
They didn't have a SID.
Right.
So there wasn't, they're
Yeah.
doing this
Yeah.
ASP work, so it's kind of been this unique circumstance for
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
It really has. But I'm glad we're spending all this time and attention and energy.
It's gonna be exciting.
It is exciting. So great. All right. So Commissioner Repart, you'll be appointed to this.
Okay.
Commissioner Kelly, I'll let you follow up on that in appointments. All right. Any other questions or comments, commissioners? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, and last, that will take us to a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an amendment to the retail and wholesale water and sanitary sewer service agreements with retail and wholesale customer communities. Can I get a motion?
Moved.
Support.
All right, so this is a fun topic.
Yes, and last but not least, I hope. This is just the Fifth Amendment to the Water and Sewer Service Agreements. This was presented to the Utility Advisory Board in January. The members, our partner communities went out to each of their legislative bodies, approved it, and now the final step is your approval. Included in the amendments is, I listed it off there in the memo, and I'll read it out loud, is just the change to the methodology for the integrated connection fee, which will be effective April 1st, 2018. This also will include a 3-year marketing effort. And effectively, we're linking the connection fee to the actual cost of service rather than in the annual rate study, I just increased it by CPI. That was a former methodology. Now we're trying to hone in on the actual cost of that, getting people to connect into the system. Also, secondly, we're going to take surcharge fees, and they're not necessarily going to be uniform anymore. This is just to clarify what we're doing with our surcharge customers. It's making the allowance for different types of waste that we charge for. And a couple years ago, we enacted the surcharge credit, which allows me to recognize in rates when we receive operational savings. So we make adjustments for that. The next 3 items is basically formalizing in contract what we've already adopted as policies as the Utility Advisory Board, and that's concerns related to changing the utility service district sizes, as well as the urban utility boundary, and also just formalizing in the contracts that the Utility Advisory Board has the authority to make policy. And then finally, we went to each of our partner communities and did uniform maps for each. So we have, just reset the utility service boundaries, utility service districts and the utility service boundaries. Tongue twister. So, if there are any questions? No?
All right, commissioners? Questions?
Yeah, I will say I'll be back soon to also have a resolution to approve the extension of the third extension of this contract. So one of the things that was holding up the third extension in 2014 was addressing the integrated connection fees, so.
All right. Well, Molly, I know a lot of work goes into this, so thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So with this, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioner, that is our last action item. I want to remind you of a...
Get through it.
I know. Crazy. I could have let Connie talk for another 10 minutes. So a couple things, just as a reminder. Next, some of us go into public safety. So we have that at 11:30. We have legislative meeting at 12:30. We have our work session today at 3 p.m. back in here. And all of you should have received the packet for the work session for this afternoon. And then tonight at 7, we have our commission meeting back in here. We have quite a few public hearings, so please eat a healthy dinner before you come back in here, because I anticipate it will be a long night. Any final thoughts for the good of the order? All right. With that, we are adjourned, and we'll see you down on the 6th floor.
3 o'clock. I'll send you the